The funeral director looked down at his clipboard, squinting through wire-rimmed glasses as he addressed the small crowd gathered in the chapel. "We're here today to honor the memory of Robert Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying the practiced solemnity of someone who had delivered countless eulogies. His surviving family includes his wife Margaret, his son David, and his, He paused, looking directly at me with uncertainty. "His nephew. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." Just his nephew. Not Tyler Harrison. Not the person who had spent every summer of his childhood at Uncle Robert's farm in Nebraska. Not the kid who had learned to drive a tractor at age 12 or helped rebuild that old Chevy engine in the garage. Just his nephew. I shifted uncomfortably in the front pew, feeling the weight of unfamiliar stares from relatives I barely recognized. It had been 15 years since I'd last seen most of them. 15 years since I'd walked away from this small farming community in Hartwell, Nebraska, chasing dreams that seemed impossible to anyone who'd never left the county line. But what happened next would change everything I thought I knew about the man we were gathered to mourn. The chapel felt smaller than I remembered. St. Mary's had been the cornerstone of Hartwell for over a century, its white wooden walls and simple stained glass windows a testament to the straightforward faith of farming communities. I'd sat in these same pews every Sunday as a child, usually between Uncle Robert and Aunt Margaret, listening to Pastor Williams deliver sermons about perseverance and community values. Now 32 years old and wearing a black suit that cost more than most people in this town made in a week, I felt like an outsider looking in. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my teenage years desperate to escape this place, to prove I was destined for something bigger than cornfields and county fairs. Now, sitting here among faces that once knew me as Bobby Mitchell's boy, I realized how thoroughly I'd succeeded in that escape. The funeral director, a thin man named Eugene Carlson, who'd probably buried half the town over the past 3 decades, continued with the service details. Uncle Robert would be laid to rest at Hartwell Cemetery, followed by a reception at the community center. Standard procedure for a man who'd lived his entire 74 years within a 20-mile radius of where he was born. I glanced around the chapel, taking inventory of the mourners. Aunt Margaret sat in the front row, her silver hair carefully styled despite her grief. She'd aged considerably since I'd last seen her, but her posture remained straight, dignified. Beside her, my cousin David fidgeted with his tie, clearly uncomfortable in formal wear. David had taken over the farm operations 5 years ago, when Uncle Robert's arthritis made the physical demands too challenging. Behind them, scattered throughout the pews, were the usual suspects of small-town funerals. The Hendersons from the neighboring farm, the Kowalskis who ran the grain elevator, Mrs. Chen from the post office, and at least 24 others whose names I should have remembered but didn't. They'd all aged, gained weight, lost hair, accumulated the wear and tear of lives lived in service to land and community. What struck me most was how they looked at me, not with recognition or warmth, but with the polite curiosity reserved for strangers. 15 years ago, I'd been Tyler Harrison, star quarterback of the Hartwell High Eagles, homecoming king, and valedictorian. I'd been the golden boy who everyone expected to come back after college and take over his family's insurance business in town. Instead, I'd disappeared into the world of Silicon Valley startups, climbing the corporate ladder with a ruthless efficiency that would have been foreign to anyone in this room. I'd traded overalls for tailored suits, pickup trucks for luxury sedans, and community barbecues for networking events in glass towers. The transformation had been so complete that even I sometimes forgot the boy who'd once known every dirt road in Butler County. The service began with Pastor Williams, now in his 70s but still commanding attention from the pulpit. He spoke about Uncle Robert's dedication to his family, his service to the community, and his quiet faith that had sustained him through decades of farming's inevitable ups and downs. The eulogy painted a picture of a man who'd lived a good life by small-town standards, honest, hardworking, devoted to his family and neighbors. But even as Pastor Williams spoke, I found myself thinking about Uncle Robert, who'd never quite fit that simple narrative. The man who'd spent hours in his workshop, not just fixing farm equipment, but building intricate wooden toys that he'd donate anonymously to the church's Christmas drive. The uncle who'd taught me chess on winter evenings, playing with a strategic mind that seemed out of place in a farming community. The man who'd always had a stack of history books on his nightstand, particularly biographies of military leaders and accounts of World War II battles. There had always been something different about Uncle Robert, something that set him apart from the other farmers in the area. He carried himself with a quiet authority that went beyond his role as a successful landowner. When he spoke at town meetings, people listened with a respect that seemed disproportionate to his official status. When younger men needed advice, they sought him out, and he always seemed to know exactly what to say. But the most telling difference was in how he treated me during those childhood summers. While other adults in town saw me as just another farm kid, Uncle Robert had always seemed to expect more. He'd pushed me harder, demanded better, and held me to standards that felt almost military in their precision. At the time, I'd assumed it was just his way of preparing me for the responsibilities of adulthood. Now, sitting in this chapel listening to a eulogy that reduced him to the simple role of farmer and family man, I wondered if there had been depths to Uncle Robert that none of us had fully understood. The first hint came during the sharing of memories. David stood up, his voice shaking slightly as he talked about his father's patience in teaching him to operate the combine harvester. Mrs. Henderson shared a story about how Uncle Robert had helped her family through a particularly difficult harvest when her husband had been injured. Pastor Williams talked about Uncle Robert's quiet generosity, his willingness to help neighbors without expectation of recognition or repayment. But then something unexpected happened. A woman I didn't recognize, probably in her 60s, with gray hair and wearing a simple black dress, stood up in the back of the chapel. She walked forward with purpose, her steps measured and deliberate. "I hope you don't mind," she said, addressing Pastor Williams but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I know I'm not from around here, but I felt I needed to say something about Robert Mitchell." The chapel fell silent. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, the appearance of a stranger at a funeral was unusual enough to command attention. "My name is Eleanor Watkins," she continued, her voice carrying a slight accent that I couldn't quite place. "I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C. I drove out here today because I felt someone should represent the military community that Robert served with such distinction." A murmur rippled through the chapel. Military community? Uncle Robert had never served in the military, at least not that anyone in the family knew about. He'd been too young for Vietnam and too old for the Gulf War. The idea of him having any military connection seemed completely foreign to everything we'd been told about his life. Eleanor Watkins seemed to sense the confusion. She smiled sadly, looking around the chapel with eyes that suggested she'd seen similar reactions before. "I realize this might come as a surprise to some of you," she said. "Robert was a very private man about his service, but I think it's important that you know who he really was, especially now that he's gone." She paused, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a folder. Robert Mitchell served his country for over 20 years, including 2 tours in places that most of you have probably never heard of. He was a decorated officer who earned the respect of everyone who served under his command. But more than that, he was a man who understood that true service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. I felt the world tilt slightly. Uncle Robert? A military officer? The man who'd spent his entire adult life farming corn and soybeans in Nebraska? It seemed impossible, yet something about Eleanor Watkins' manner suggested she wasn't the type of person who made mistakes about such things. "When Robert retired from active duty," she continued, "he could have gone anywhere, done anything. Instead, he chose to come back to his hometown and live quietly. But he never stopped serving. He mentored young soldiers who were transitioning to civilian life, helped veterans navigate the bureaucracy of benefit systems, and provided counsel to military families dealing with deployment stress." The chapel remained silent, everyone processing this revelation. I found myself trying to reconcile this new information with the Uncle Robert I'd known. The chess games, the history books, the way he'd carried himself with quiet authority. Suddenly, these details took on new meaning. "Robert Mitchell was more than a farmer," Eleanor Watkins said, her voice growing stronger. "He was a leader, a mentor, and a patriot, who chose to serve his community just as faithfully as he'd served his country. And while he may not have wanted public recognition for his military service, I believe his family and friends deserve to know the full measure of the man they're mourning today. She returned to her seat, leaving the chapel in stunned silence. Pastor Williams cleared his throat, clearly uncertain how to proceed with a eulogy that had just been fundamentally altered by new information. But I was barely listening anymore. My mind was racing through 15 years of memories, looking for clues I'd missed, signs I'd ignored. The Uncle Robert, who'd taught me to think strategically, who'd demanded excellence, who'd always seemed to know more about the world than a simple farmer should have known. Who exactly had Robert Mitchell been, and why had he kept this enormous part of his life secret from everyone, including his own family? The answers to those questions would soon prove to be more shocking than anything I could have imagined. The reception at the community center felt like stepping into a parallel universe. The same people who'd sat in stunned silence during Eleanor Watkins' revelation were now clustered in small groups, their conversations punctuated by glances in my direction and hushed speculation about Uncle Robert's hidden military career. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I stood near the coffee station, balancing a paper plate of casseroles that all tasted like variations of the same recipe, watching my family navigate this new reality. Aunt Margaret sat at a corner table, surrounded by her closest friends, her face a mask of composure that barely concealed her confusion. Every few minutes, someone would approach her with condolences that now carried an undertone of curiosity about the husband she'd apparently never fully known. David looked shell-shocked. He kept running his hands through his hair, a nervous habit I remembered from our childhood, while fielding questions from neighbors about his father's secret life. The weight of learning that your father had been someone entirely different from who you'd believed him to be was written across his face in deep lines of bewilderment. "You're Tyler Harrison, aren't you?" I turned to find Eleanor Watkins standing beside me, her presence somehow both authoritative and gentle. Up close, I could see she had the bearing of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news to grieving families. "I am," I said, setting down my untouched plate. "Though apparently, I'm the only one here who remembers my name." She smiled at that, a knowing expression that suggested she'd witnessed similar family dynamics before. Small towns have long memories, but they're selective about what they choose to remember. You left quite an impression when you were younger. Not enough of one, apparently. I gestured toward the crowd. Half these people looked at me like I was crashing a stranger's funeral. "Success has a way of creating distance," Eleanor said, "but that's not why I wanted to talk to you. I have something that belonged to your uncle. Something I think you should have." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. Uncle Robert's work, probably carved during one of those winter evenings when he'd disappear into his workshop for hours. "He gave this to me about 6 months ago," Eleanor explained. "Asked me to make sure it found its way to the right person if something happened to him. He was very specific about who should receive it." I accepted the box with trembling hands. It was heavier than I'd expected, and there was something inside that shifted when I moved it. "What is it?" "Open it when you're ready," she said. "But not here. This is something private. Something he meant for you alone." Before I could ask more questions, she was walking away, moving through the crowd with the same purposeful stride she'd displayed in the chapel. I watched her go, then slipped the box into my jacket pocket, acutely aware of its weight against my chest. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of awkward conversations and half-remembered introductions. People kept approaching me with stories about Uncle Robert that now carried new weight. Tom Schneider, who owned a hardware store, mentioned how Uncle Robert had always known exactly what tools to recommend for specific jobs, even ones that Tom had never heard of. Sarah Martinez, who taught at the elementary school, talked about how Uncle Robert had volunteered to speak to her class about leadership, delivering a presentation that had been far more sophisticated than anything she'd expected from a local farmer. All these small details, previously dismissed as quirks of personality, now formed a pattern that painted a picture of a man who'd been hiding in plain sight. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself studying the other mourners with new eyes. Were there others who knew Uncle Robert's secret? Were there clues I'd missed? Signs that would have revealed his true identity if I had been paying attention? The answer came from an unexpected source. As I was helping stack chairs after the reception, I overheard a conversation between two elderly men I recognized as regulars at Murphy's Diner, the town's unofficial gathering place for morning coffee and local gossip. "Always wondered about Bob Mitchell," one of them was saying. "Remember that time back in '98 when those kids got lost in the state forest during that camping trip?" "Course I remember," the other replied. "Search and rescue couldn't find them for 2 days. But Bob just walked into those woods like he had a GPS in his head and came out 6 hours later with both boys, calm as you please. And when that tornado touched down in '03, he was the one organizing the emergency response before the county officials even showed up. Acted like he'd done it 100 times before. Makes sense now, doesn't it? Military training explains a lot about old Bob." I finished stacking the chairs and walked outside, needing air and space to process everything I'd learned. The parking lot was nearly empty now, with only a few stragglers saying their final goodbyes. The sun was setting over the Nebraska plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of childhood evenings spent on Uncle Robert's porch, listening to his stories about places far from Hartwell. Stories that I'd always assumed were fiction. Aunt Margaret found me there, standing beside my rental car with my hands shoved deep in my pockets. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from having your entire understanding of your life rewritten in the span of a few hours. "Tyler," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it all day, "I'm glad you came." "I'm sorry I stayed away so long," I said, meaning it more than I'd expected to. "I should have visited more often." She nodded, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. 15 years of missed holidays, graduations, and family gatherings couldn't be erased with a simple apology. "Your uncle talked about you often. He was proud of what you'd accomplished." "Even though I left?" "Especially because you left." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Robert always said you were different from the other kids. Said you had something special that shouldn't be wasted on farming if your heart wasn't in it." I felt tears threatening for the first time since I'd received the call about Uncle Robert's death. I didn't know he felt that way. "There's a lot we didn't know about your uncle, apparently." Aunt Margaret's voice carried a mixture of sadness and bewilderment. 47 years of marriage, and I find out at his funeral that he was a decorated military officer. How does something like that happen? I didn't have an answer for her. Instead, I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. We stood there in the parking lot as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, two people trying to make sense of a man who'd apparently been a master at keeping secrets. "That woman, Eleanor," Aunt Margaret said when she finally pulled away. "She gave me a business card, said there were benefits I might be entitled to, paperwork that needed to be filed, military honors for the burial if I wanted them." "Do you?" "I don't know." She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "It feels like I'd be honoring a stranger. Or maybe you'd be honoring the complete person instead of just the part you knew." She considered this, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Your uncle always said you were the smart one in the family." After she drove away, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the community center go dark. The weight of Uncle Robert's box pressed against my chest like a physical reminder of secrets yet to be revealed. Finally, I started the engine and drove to the only hotel in town, a modest place called the Prairie Inn that catered mostly to traveling salesmen and the occasional tourist exploring rural Nebraska. My room was simple but clean, with a view of Main Street that hadn't changed much since my childhood. I could see Murphy's Diner, the hardware store, the post office, and the bank where my parents had conducted their business before they'd moved to Florida after my father's retirement. I ordered room service, a club sandwich and coffee, and sat on the bed with Uncle Robert's box in my hands. The wood was smooth and warm, and I could smell the faint scent of the oil he'd used to finish it. On the bottom, carved in small letters, were the words, "For Tyler, the truth is often hidden in plain sight, R.M." With trembling fingers, I opened the box. Inside, nestled in red velvet, was a military medal I didn't recognize, its ribbon a combination of blue and gold stripes. Beneath it was a folded piece of paper and a small key attached to a leather cord. I unfolded the paper to find Uncle Robert's handwriting, the same careful script I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas notes. Tyler, if you're reading this, then Eleanor has done what I asked her to do. What you learned today about my military service is only the beginning. There are things about our family, about you, that I've kept hidden, for reasons that I hope you'll understand once you know the whole truth. The key will open a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. Tell them you're my designated beneficiary. The paperwork is already filed. What you find there will change everything you thought you knew about who you are and where you come from. Be careful who you trust with this information. Some secrets are kept for good reasons. Uncle Robert? I stared at the note until the words blurred together, my mind reeling with implications I couldn't yet fully grasp. A safety deposit box, more secrets, and a warning about trust that suggested whatever Uncle Robert had hidden was more significant than a simple military career. The metal caught the light from the bedside lamp, its surface reflecting patterns that seemed to shift and change as I turned it in my hands. Whatever Uncle Robert had been, whatever he'd done, it had been important enough to earn recognition from his country, and dangerous enough to require decades of secrecy. I placed everything back in the box and set it on the nightstand, but I knew sleep would be impossible. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank and unlock whatever secrets Uncle Robert had left for me to find. I had a feeling my quiet visit to Hartwell was about to become much more complicated. First National Bank of Hartwell occupied the same brick building it had for over 80 years, its facade a testament to the kind of institutional permanence that small towns prided themselves on. I stood across the street at 8:45 a.m., watching employees unlock the front doors and flip the sign from closed to open, while clutching Uncle Robert's key so tightly that the leather cord left marks on my palm. The morning was crisp for late October, with frost still clinging to the courthouse lawn and my breath visible in small puffs as I crossed Main Street. Inside the bank, the familiar smell of old wood and floor polish transported me back to childhood trips with my parents, standing in line behind farmers depositing harvest checks and elderly women withdrawing their weekly spending money. "Can I help you?" The teller, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, looked up from her computer screen. Her name tag read Susan Chen, probably Mrs. Chen's daughter, though I couldn't be sure. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I said, producing the key and Uncle Robert's note. "Box 247. I'm the designated beneficiary for Robert Mitchell." Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to something more personal. "Oh, you must be Tyler. Your uncle mentioned you might come by someday." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Mitchell was a wonderful man." Another person who'd known Uncle Robert better than I'd realized. I was beginning to understand that my 15-year absence had created gaps in my knowledge that went far beyond simple family updates. Susan led me through a security door and down a narrow hallway lined with metal boxes of various sizes. The basement of the bank felt like a vault from another era, all concrete walls and fluorescent lighting that hummed with electrical tension. "Here we are," she said, stopping in front of box 247. "I'll need to verify your identity, of course, but your uncle filed all the paperwork months ago. He was very thorough about making sure everything was in order." After checking my driver's license and having me sign several forms, Susan used her master key in combination with Uncle Robert's key to open the box. She pulled out a metal container about the size of a shoebox and handed it to me. "You can use the private room over there," she said, gesturing toward a small office with a single chair and table. "Take all the time you need." I thanked her and carried the container into the room, my hands shaking slightly as I set it down. The metal was cold and heavier than I'd expected, with a simple latch that opened with a soft click. Inside, organized with military precision, were documents, photographs, and objects that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my family. The first item was a manila folder labeled Tyler Harrison, Background. I opened it to find a comprehensive dossier that looked like something from a government intelligence file. My social security number, birth certificate, school records, college transcripts, employment history, and even my current address in San Francisco were all documented with frightening accuracy. but it was the photograph paper-clipped to the inside cover that made my blood run cold. It was a surveillance photo of me taken outside my apartment building, dated just 3 weeks ago. I was carrying my laptop bag and wearing the blue jacket I'd bought last month, completely unaware that someone had been watching me. Beneath the photo was a handwritten note in Uncle Robert's careful script. "Tyler, if you're reading this, then certain people know you've come to Hartwell. Your safety depends on how quickly you can process what I'm about to show you. Time is not on your side." My hands were trembling as I set the folder aside and reached for the next item, a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be official military documents. But these weren't standard service records. They were classified intelligence reports, bearing stamps and signatures that suggested access to information far above the level of a typical Army officer. The name at the top of each document wasn't Robert Mitchell, it was Colonel Robert Harrison. Harrison. My last name. I stared at the documents, my mind struggling to process the implications. Uncle Robert wasn't my uncle. He was my father, but that was impossible. My father was James Harrison, who died in a car accident when I was 3 years old. My mother had remarried Thomas Mitchell, and Uncle Robert was Thomas's brother. Or so I'd always been told. I flipped through the classified reports, my confusion growing with each page. Operations in countries I'd never heard of. Intelligence assessments. Personnel evaluations. And recurring references to something called Project Nightfall that seemed to be the common thread connecting all of Uncle Robert's military activities. A photograph fell out of the portfolio. A military portrait of a younger Uncle Robert in dress uniform, his chest decorated with medals and ribbons. But it was the man standing next to him that made my breath catch. Even though the photo was at least 30 years old, I recognized him immediately. It was my father. The real James Harrison, wearing the same uniform and looking exactly like the man in the few childhood photos I'd seen. Beneath the photo, in Uncle Robert's handwriting, "Your father and I were partners in everything. When he died, I promised to watch over you. But I also promised to keep you safe from the people who killed him." The room suddenly felt too small, too airless. I loosened my tie and forced myself to keep reading, even though each revelation seemed to pull the foundation out from under my understanding of my own life. The next document was a birth certificate, my real birth certificate. According to this version, I wasn't Tyler Harrison, son of James Harrison and Linda Harrison. I was Tyler Robert Harrison, son of Colonel James Harrison and Major Linda Harrison. Both of my parents had been military officers, and both had been involved in operations classified at the highest levels of government. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a cloth that had clearly been handled many times over the years, was a small wooden frame containing a family photograph. It showed a young couple in military dress uniforms, holding a baby who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. The man was definitely my father, James Harrison. The woman was my mother, but she looked nothing like the Linda Mitchell I'd grown up with. This woman was confident, professional, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She wore the insignia of a major in military intelligence, and her eyes held a hardness that suggested she'd seen things that had fundamentally changed her understanding of the world. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, someone had written James, Linda, and Tyler, Project Nightfall Team Alpha, 1992. I was born into a military intelligence operation. My parents hadn't been ordinary officers. They'd been covert operatives involved in something significant enough to require the highest level of classification. And according to Uncle Robert's note, it had gotten my father killed. I reached for the last item in the box, a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Uncle Robert's handwriting. Inside was a letter that would explain everything, but also change my life forever. "Tyler," the letter began, "by now you understand that everything you've believed about your family has been a carefully constructed lie. I'm sorry for the deception, but it was necessary to keep you alive. Your parents weren't killed in a car accident. They were assassinated by people who wanted to stop Project Nightfall and eliminate everyone connected to it. I've spent the last 29 years making sure those same people never found you." The letter went on to explain that Project Nightfall had been a joint intelligence operation designed to identify and neutralize foreign agents who had infiltrated the highest levels of American government and industry. My parents had been part of a small team that had discovered evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the Pentagon, the CIA, and several major corporations. "When your father was killed," Uncle Robert wrote, "I knew they would come for you and your mother next. We staged your mother's death and gave her a new identity. She's been living under the name Linda Mitchell for the past 29 years, pretending to be the widow of a small-town insurance agent. She remarried Thomas Mitchell as part of her cover, and I played the role of your uncle to maintain the fiction. My mother was alive. Not only alive, but she'd been living a lie for nearly 3 decades to protect me from people who'd wanted to kill me as a child. The people who killed your father are still out there," the letter continued. "They're older now, but they're not less dangerous. They've been watching, waiting for any sign that Project Nightfall might resurface. Your success in Silicon Valley, your high-profile career, has made you visible in ways that concern me. I've been monitoring their surveillance of you, and I believe they're getting close to making a move." The surveillance photograph suddenly made terrible sense. I wasn't just being watched by random intelligence operatives. I was being tracked by the same people who'd killed my father. "If you're reading this letter," Uncle Robert concluded, "then I'm dead, and you're in immediate danger. The medal I left you isn't just a keepsake, it's a signal. Show it to Eleanor Watkins, she'll know what to do. But whatever you do, don't trust anyone else. The conspiracy that killed your parents reaches into every level of government and law enforcement. Your only hope is to disappear completely and let Eleanor help you find your mother. She's been waiting 29 years to see you again." I sat back in the chair, staring at the letter until the words blurred together. Everything I'd believed about my life, my family, my identity, all of it had been an elaborate deception, designed to keep me safe from people who'd wanted to kill me before I could walk. Uncle Robert hadn't been my uncle. He'd been my father's partner and my protector, watching over me from a distance while maintaining the fiction that allowed me to live a normal life. And now he was dead, which meant the protection he'd provided was gone. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Susan Chen's voice came through the thin wood. "Mr. Harrison, is everything all right? You've been in there for over an hour." I quickly gathered all the documents and photographs, stuffing them back into the metal container. "I'm fine," I called back, "just finishing up." But I wasn't fine. I was the son of murdered intelligence operatives, the target of a conspiracy that had already killed my father, and the keeper of secrets that powerful people would kill to protect. As I walked back through the bank and out onto Main Street, I realized that my quiet visit to Hartwell had just become a matter of life and death. The people who'd been watching me in San Francisco now knew exactly where I was, and Uncle Robert's funeral had probably been the perfect opportunity for them to close the net. I needed to find Eleanor Watkins, and I needed to find her fast. Eleanor Watkins wasn't at the Prairie Inn. The desk clerk, a teenage boy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, informed me that she'd checked out early that morning. No forwarding address, no message, and she'd paid in cash. I stood in the hotel lobby, clutching the metal container and feeling the walls close in around me. The one person Uncle Robert had told me to trust had vanished, leaving me alone in a town where I no longer knew who was friend or enemy. The morning foot traffic on Main Street seemed different now, viewed through the lens of paranoia that came with learning you were the target of a decades-old conspiracy. Every person walking past the hotel windows could be a threat. Every car parked along the street might contain someone watching and waiting. I retreated to my room and spread Uncle Robert's documents across the bed, searching for any clue about how to contact Eleanor or where she might have gone. The classified reports mentioned several locations: Washington, D.C., Norfolk, Virginia, and something called Facility 7 in Colorado Springs. But none of these gave me any immediate leads. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stay in your room. Do not use hotel phone or Wi-Fi. Wait for contact. Montaigne. E. Eleanor." She hadn't disappeared. She was being careful, which meant the danger Uncle Robert had warned about was real and immediate. I deleted the message and turned off my phone, then wedged a chair under the door handle and closed the curtains. If I was going to be trapped in this room, I might as well use the time to piece together everything Uncle Robert had left for me. The classified documents painted a picture of an intelligence operation that had operated at the highest levels of secrecy. Project Nightfall appeared to have been investigating what the reports called Operation Starlight, a conspiracy involving foreign agents who had infiltrated American institutions over the course of several decades. According to the files, these weren't typical spies seeking military secrets or technological information. They were long-term plants whose mission was to influence American policy from within, gradually steering the country's decisions in ways that served foreign interests. Some had been in place for over 20 years, occupying positions in Congress, the Pentagon, major corporations, and even intelligence agencies themselves. My parents had been part of a small team tasked with identifying these infiltrators and building cases against them. But according to Uncle Robert's notes, they'd discovered something that went beyond simple espionage. The foreign agents weren't just stealing secrets or influencing policy, they were actively working to destabilize American institutions from within. A soft knock at my door made me freeze. I hadn't heard footsteps in the hallway, and the knock was so quiet I almost missed it. "Tyler." The voice was female, but not Eleanor's. "It's Linda, your mother." My mother. After 29 years of believing she was dead, my mother was standing outside my hotel room door. I moved to the window and carefully parted the curtains, looking down at the street for any signs of surveillance vehicles or unusual activity. The street appeared normal, but appearances had proven unreliable since arriving in Hartwell. "How do I know it's really you?" I called through the door. "Because I know you have your father's hands in my stubborn streak," came the reply. "And because you used to have nightmares about green monsters until you were 7 years old." The nightmares. I'd never told anyone about those dreams, not even Uncle Robert. My mother, the woman I'd known as Linda Mitchell, had been the only one who could calm me down during those terrible nights when sleep brought visions of creatures that seemed more real than dreams. I moved the chair and opened the door to find a woman who looked like an older version of the confident military officer in Uncle Robert's photograph. Her hair was still blonde but streaked with silver, and her eyes held the same hardness I'd seen in the family picture. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, but she carried herself with the posture of someone accustomed to command. "Hello, Tyler," she said, and I could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "You've grown up to look exactly like your father." I stepped aside to let her enter, still struggling to process the reality of seeing her alive. The woman who'd raised me had been warm, nurturing, the perfect small-town mother who'd attended every school play and soccer game. This woman was clearly the same person, but there was a steel beneath the surface that had been carefully hidden for decades. "Is Linda Mitchell even your real name?" I asked as she surveyed the documents I'd spread across the bed. "Linda Harrison was my real name," she said, picking up one of the classified reports. "Linda Mitchell was the identity Robert created for me after your father was killed. I've been playing that role for so long that sometimes I forget who I used to be." She sat on the edge of the bed, handling the documents with the familiarity of someone who'd seen them before. "Robert was supposed to burn all of this after my funeral. I should have known he'd keep copies. He kept them for me. He said you'd been waiting 29 years to see me again. Every single day." Her voice broke slightly. "Do you have any idea how hard it's been to watch you grow up from a distance? To sit at your high school graduation knowing I couldn't hug you or tell you how proud I was? To attend family dinners where I had to pretend to be your aunt instead of your mother?" The weight of her sacrifice hit me like a physical blow. She'd given up her relationship with her son to keep him safe, living a lie so complete that even I had never suspected the truth. "Why didn't you tell me when I turned 18, or 21? When was I going to be old enough to know the truth?" She picked up the photograph of my father and stared at it for a long moment. "When the people who killed him were dead or in prison. When we could be sure you'd be safe. Robert and I always planned to tell you eventually, but..." "But what?" "But the conspiracy was bigger than we realized. Every time we thought we'd identified all the players, we'd discover new connections. Deeper infiltration. The people we were hunting weren't just foreign agents. They were part of a network that included American citizens in positions of incredible power." She pulled a laptop from her bag and opened it, typing quickly. The screen filled with what looked like a genealogy chart, but instead of family connections, it showed the relationships between various government officials, military officers, and corporate executives. "This is what your father died for," she said, pointing to the screen, "and what Robert and I have been building for the past 30 years. A complete map of the conspiracy that's been working to undermine American interests from within." The chart was massive, with hundreds of names connected by lines indicating various relationships. I could see senators, generals, CEOs of major defense contractors, and senior officials from multiple intelligence agencies. "How do you know all this?" Because Robert never stopped investigating. He used his position as a small-town farmer to stay off their radar, while he built this network of contacts and information sources. And because I've been using my role as Linda Mitchell to get close to people who would never suspect a widow from Nebraska of being a former intelligence officer. She clicked on one of the names, and a detailed profile appeared. Senator William Crawford, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. According to the file, he'd been taking money from foreign sources for over 15 years, using his position to influence committee decisions and leak classified information. "Crawford was one of the people who ordered your father's assassination," my mother said quietly. "He's also the one who's been tracking your movements in San Francisco." The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. My success in Silicon Valley hadn't just made me visible, it had made me valuable. Someone with my background in technology and my family connections to Project Nightfall could be either a powerful asset or a dangerous threat. "They want to recruit me," I said, understanding flooding through me, "or eliminate you if recruitment fails." She closed the laptop. "Robert's death wasn't natural, Tyler. They killed him because he was getting too close to exposing the full scope of their operation. And now that you're here, they know we're still active." A sound in the hallway made us both freeze. Footsteps that had stopped directly outside my door. My mother moved with surprising speed, pulling a small pistol from her purse and positioning herself beside the window. "Tyler Harrison." The voice from the hallway was male, authoritative. "This is Agent Davis with the FBI. We need to speak with you about the documents you removed from First National Bank this morning." My mother's expression told me everything I needed to know about Agent Davis and his credentials. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On 0, she threw open the door and stepped into the hallway with her weapon drawn. "Federal agents don't travel alone, and they don't come to hotel rooms without local police backup," she said calmly. I couldn't see what was happening in the hallway, but I heard the sound of someone dropping something heavy, followed by my mother's voice. "Tyler, bring the documents. We're leaving, now." I grabbed the metal container and Uncle Robert's wooden box, stuffing them into my laptop bag as I rushed toward the door. In the hallway, I saw a man in a dark suit lying unconscious against the wall, and my mother standing over him with cable ties in her hands. "Is he really FBI?" I asked as she quickly secured his hands and feet. "He's really dead if we stay here much longer," she replied, finishing with the restraints. "His backup will be here in about 3 minutes." We took the stairs down to the hotel's rear exit, emerging into an alley that connected to the main street. My mother led me to a nondescript sedan parked behind the diner, its engine already running. "Eleanor?" I asked as I recognized the woman behind the wheel. "Robert's contingency plan," Eleanor said as we climbed into the car. "If anything happened to him, your mother and I were supposed to extract you immediately." As we drove out of Hartwell, I watched the town disappear in the rearview mirror and realized I was leaving behind more than just a place. I was leaving behind the entire fictional life that Uncle Robert and my mother had created to keep me safe. The question now was whether that safety had been worth the price they'd all paid for it, and whether we could stay alive long enough to finish what my father had started 30 years ago. The safe house was a converted farmhouse, 30 miles outside Omaha, hidden behind a grove of cottonwood trees and accessible only by a dirt road that wound through cornfields. Eleanor killed the engine and sat in silence for a moment, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. "Clear," she announced, though I noticed she kept her hand near the pistol holstered beneath her jacket. Inside, the farmhouse looked ordinary enough: worn furniture, outdated kitchen appliances, and family photographs on the mantelpiece that probably belonged to whoever owned the property before it became a government safe house. But the basement revealed the building's true purpose. The underground room was a sophisticated command center that would have impressed my colleagues in Silicon Valley. Multiple computer monitors lined one wall, displaying feeds from security cameras positioned around the property. Communication equipment hummed quietly in a corner, and filing cabinets contained what appeared to be decades' worth of intelligence reports. Robert built this over 15 years, my mother explained, settling into a chair in front of the main computer terminal. It's completely off the grid. Solar power, satellite internet connection routed through 6 different countries, and enough supplies to last 3 months if necessary. Eleanor was already working at one of the secondary terminals, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "We have a problem," she announced. "The Hartwell incident made the networks. They know Tyler's in play." She turned one of the monitors toward us, displaying what looked like an encrypted chat room. Lines of text scrolled past too quickly for me to read, but my mother's expression grew darker with each message. "What are they saying?" I asked. "That Robert's nephew has surfaced, and appears to have inherited more than just farming equipment," Eleanor replied. "They're mobilizing assets across 3 states to track us down." My mother pulled up a different screen showing a map of the Midwest dotted with red markers. Each of these represents a known operative in their network. Some are foreign agents, but most are Americans who've been compromised through blackmail, bribery, or ideological conversion. The scope was staggering. The markers covered major cities from Chicago to Denver, with concentrations around military bases, government facilities, and technology centers. It wasn't just a spy network, it was a shadow government operating within American institutions. "How is this possible?" I asked. "How could something this big stay hidden for so long?" "Because most of the people involved don't know they're part of it," my mother said. "The network operates on a cell structure. Each person only knows their immediate contacts and the specific tasks they're assigned. Only a few people at the top understand the full scope of the operation." She clicked on one of the red markers near Washington, D.C., bringing up a detailed profile. The photo showed a distinguished man in his 60s, wearing the uniform of a 4-star general. "General Marcus Webb, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff," she continued. "He's been feeding intelligence to foreign handlers for 12 years, but he thinks he's working for a legitimate Pentagon Black Ops program. He has no idea his information is going to enemy governments." "And the people who do know the truth?" Eleanor answered without looking up from her terminal. 7 individuals control the entire network. We call them the Council. They've been planning this infiltration for over 40 years, placing assets in key positions and waiting for the right moment to activate them. Activate them for what? "Economic collapse, political chaos, military paralysis," my mother said matter-of-factly. "The complete breakdown of American governmental systems from within. Once the country destabilizes sufficiently, they can step in with, quote, solutions that essentially hand control to foreign powers." I sat down heavily in the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were describing. "And my father discovered this?" "Your father and I were investigating financial irregularities in defense contracts when we stumbled onto the first layer of the conspiracy," my mother said. "What started as a routine audit became something much more dangerous when we realized the corruption was systematic and intentional." She pulled up another file, this one containing photographs and documents from the early 1990s. I could see my parents in several of the images, working alongside other military personnel in what appeared to be a Pentagon office. "We were part of a joint task force investigating procurement fraud," she continued. "But the deeper we dug, the more we realized we weren't dealing with simple corruption. Someone was deliberately weakening American military capabilities while funneling technology and intelligence to foreign governments." "So you started Project Nightfall." "We started documenting everything we found and building a case for prosecution. But when we tried to report our findings through official channels, we discovered that several of the people we were supposed to report to were part of the conspiracy themselves." Eleanor's terminal chimed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, then swore under her breath, "We have visitors incoming. 3 vehicles, military-style formation, about 10 minutes out." My mother was already moving, pulling weapons and equipment from concealed storage areas around the room. "How many?" "At least 12 operatives, possibly more. And Tyler, they're not here to arrest you." The casual way they discussed armed confrontation told me this wasn't their first time being hunted. My mother handed me a Kevlar vest and a compact pistol. then began typing rapidly on the main computer terminal. "I'm uploading everything to the backup servers," she explained. "If something happens to us, there are people who will continue the investigation." "What people?" "The real patriots inside the system. Military officers, intelligence analysts, and government officials who haven't been compromised. Your father had started building a network of clean contacts before he was killed. Robert and I have been expanding that network for 30 years. The sound of vehicles approaching made all conversations stop. Eleanor moved to the security monitors while my mother continued her frantic uploading. I could see headlights cutting through the darkness as 3 black SUVs approached the farmhouse. "They're not even trying to be subtle," Eleanor observed. "Full tactical gear, automatic weapons, they're planning to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence." "How long for the upload?" Eleanor asked. 3 more minutes, my mother replied without taking her eyes off the screen. "We don't have 3 minutes." Through the security monitors, I watched armed figures deploy around the farmhouse with military precision. These weren't the fake FBI agents from the hotel. They were professional soldiers carrying weapons I recognized from military contract work in Silicon Valley. "There's something else," my mother said, still typing. "Tyler, you need to understand why they want you specifically." "Because I'm your son?" "Because you're not just our son, you're the key to their entire operation." She pulled up a file I hadn't seen before, containing what appeared to be genetic analysis reports and psychological profiles. "Your father and I weren't randomly selected for Project Nightfall. We were chosen because of specific genetic markers that made us ideal for intelligence work: enhanced pattern recognition, superior memory retention, resistance to psychological manipulation." "You're saying intelligence capabilities are genetic?" "To some extent, yes. And, according to the analysis Robert commissioned, you inherited those traits from both parents in ways that make you potentially the most capable intelligence operative in a generation." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. "They don't want to kill me, they want to turn me." "They want to use your capabilities for their own purposes," Eleanor confirmed. "Someone with your technical background and genetic advantages could be worth more to them than a dozen conventional assets." Gunfire erupted from the ground floor, the sharp crack of assault rifles followed by the deeper boom of shotgun blasts. Eleanor was returning fire from positions Robert had prepared around the basement, but we were clearly outnumbered. "Upload complete," my mother announced. "Everything's been transmitted to the backup sites." She grabbed a large duffel bag from one of the storage areas and slung it over her shoulder. "There's a tunnel that leads to the barn. From there, we can reach the vehicle Robert kept hidden in the back 40. "What about the farmhouse?" "Robert built this place to be expendable," Eleanor said, still firing at targets I couldn't see. "There's enough explosive charges in the basement to make sure nobody gets any useful intelligence from what we leave behind." We moved toward a concealed entrance in the back wall of the basement, the sounds of battle growing louder above us. As we crawled through the narrow tunnel, I realized that my quiet life in Silicon Valley was over forever. I was now a fugitive from a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American government, carrying secrets that could bring down institutions and expose traitors who'd been operating undetected for decades. But more than that, I was finally understanding who I really was. Not just Tyler Harrison, the successful tech executive, but the son of intelligence operatives who died trying to save their country from enemies operating within its own borders. The tunnel ended at a hidden exit beneath a pile of hay bales in the barn. As we emerged into the night air, explosions rocked the farmhouse behind us, lighting up the sky with orange flames that would be visible for miles. "Now what?" I asked as we reached Robert's hidden vehicle, a modified pickup truck with armor plating and communications equipment that looked like something from a military convoy. "Now we finish what your parents started," my mother said, starting the engine. "We expose the council, dismantle their network, and make sure your father's death wasn't in vain." As we drove away from the burning farmhouse, I looked back one last time at the destruction behind us. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the life I'd known. I was committed now to a war that had been raging in the shadows for 30 years, fighting against enemies who'd infiltrated every level of the society I'd once trusted to protect me. The only question was whether we could win that war before it destroyed everything we were trying to save. The Pentagon parking garage at 2:30 a.m. was almost empty, with only a few scattered vehicles belonging to night shift personnel and security guards. I sat in the passenger seat of our stolen sedan, watching Eleanor check her equipment one final time while my mother reviewed the building schematics on her tablet. 3 days had passed since the farmhouse assault, 3 days of constant movement, encrypted communications with my mother's network of clean contacts, and preparation for what she called the most important intelligence operation in American history. General Webb will be leaving his office in exactly 18 minutes, my mother said, glancing at her watch. His security detail consists of 2 bodyguards who don't know they're protecting a traitor. We need to intercept him in the corridor between his office and the parking garage elevator. And if he refuses to cooperate? Eleanor held up a small device that looked like a smartphone. This contains everything we've collected over 30 years: financial records, communication intercepts, video surveillance, witness statements. Enough evidence to bring down the entire council and their network. He'll cooperate. I adjusted the Kevlar vest beneath my suit jacket and checked the miniature recording device clipped to my tie. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Confront Webb with the evidence, force him to confess on camera, and use his testimony to expose the conspiracy to the world. Why me? I asked for the dozenth time. Why not one of you? Because you're the only one they won't immediately try to kill, my mother replied. They still think they can turn you. They still see you as a potential asset rather than an enemy. And if they're wrong about that, then your father's genetic analysis was wrong too, and we're all about to die in a Pentagon corridor. We moved through the parking garage using service corridors that Eleanor had somehow gained access to. Her contacts within the legitimate intelligence community had provided building access codes, security camera blind spots, and guard rotation schedules. The Pentagon at night was a maze of empty hallways and dimmed lighting, but my mother navigated it with the confidence of someone who'd worked there for years. We reached General Webb's floor without encountering any security personnel, positioning ourselves in an alcove near the elevator bank. Remember, Eleanor whispered, Webb thinks he's working for American interests. He's been told that his intelligence sharing is part of a sanctioned black operation designed to feed misinformation to foreign governments. He doesn't know he's actually helping them. What if he doesn't believe the evidence? Then we show him the video footage of Senator Crawford receiving payment from Chinese intelligence operatives, my mother said grimly. That should convince him he's been played. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, followed by the low murmur of conversation. General Webb appeared around the corner, flanked by 2 men in suits who moved with the fluid awareness of professional bodyguards. Webb himself was exactly as he'd appeared in the photographs, distinguished, confident, and completely unaware that his entire worldview was about to be shattered. General Webb, I called out, stepping into the corridor with my hands visible and empty. The bodyguards immediately moved to intercept me, but Webb held up a hand to stop them. His eyes narrowed as he studied my face, clearly trying to place where he'd seen me before. Tyler Harrison, he said after a moment, you look exactly like your father. You knew my father? I knew James Harrison was a troublemaker who didn't understand the complexities of modern warfare, Webb replied coldly. I assume you're here to continue his misguided crusade? I'm here to show you what that crusade actually discovered. I held up the device Eleanor had given me, its screen displaying financial records that showed money flowing from foreign accounts into Webb's personal investments. His expression shifted from confidence to confusion to dawning horror as he recognized the implications. Where did you get this? He demanded. From 30 years of investigation into Operation Starlight, I said, watching his face carefully. You know that name, don't you, General? Webb's composure cracked visibly. That's a classified designation. How could you possibly? Because my parents weren't the only ones investigating the conspiracy. Because there are still patriots in the system who've been watching and documenting everything. I stepped closer, ignoring the bodyguards who'd drawn their weapons. Tell me, General, when did you first realize you weren't working for American interests? I've always worked for American interests, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Then explain this. I activated a video file that showed Webb meeting with a man in a hotel room, accepting an envelope and shaking hands. The timestamp indicated the meeting had taken place just 2 weeks ago. The man you're meeting with is Colonel Chen Wei of Chinese Military Intelligence, I continued. The envelope contains payment for intelligence you provided about American submarine positions in the South China Sea. Intelligence that resulted in the Chinese Navy intercepting and forcing the USS Columbia to surface in international waters. Webb stared at the screen, his face ashen. That's impossible. Colonel Morrison assured me that Chen was working for us, that the intelligence was part of a disinformation campaign. Colonel Morrison is also Chinese intelligence, my mother said, stepping out of the shadows with Eleanor beside her. He's been your handler for 12 years, General. You've been working for the enemy the entire time. The general's legs seemed to give out. He leaned against the wall, staring at us with the expression of a man whose entire life had just been revealed as a lie. My God, he whispered, what have I done? You've compromised American national security on a scale unprecedented in our history, Eleanor said matter-of-factly. But you can still help us fix it. She held up a tablet, displaying the organizational chart my mother had shown me at the farmhouse. We need you to identify the other council members, General. We need names, locations, communication methods, everything you know about how the network operates. Webb looked at the chart, then at each of us in turn. If I cooperate, they'll kill me. If you don't cooperate, they'll kill you anyway, my mother replied. But if you help us expose them, maybe we can protect you long enough to testify. What guarantees do I have? None, I said. But you have the chance to do something right after spending 12 years doing everything wrong. Webb was silent for a long moment, studying the evidence we'd presented. Finally, he nodded slowly. The council meets every month in different locations. The next meeting is scheduled for tomorrow night at a private estate in Virginia. I can get you the address, the security details, everything. In exchange for what? Witness protection and a chance to help undo the damage I've done. Eleanor activated a recording device. Start talking, General. What followed was the most comprehensive confession in the history of American counterintelligence. Webb detailed 12 years of treason, naming names and describing operations that had compromised everything from military deployments to economic policy. He identified the 7 council members, their methods of communication, and their ultimate goal of triggering a controlled collapse of American governmental institutions. The plan was called Project Reset, he said, his voice growing stronger as he unburdened himself of years of secret guilt. Complete economic and political destabilization, followed by a transition period where foreign powers would provide quote, assistance in rebuilding American society according to their specifications. And you believed this was in America's interests? I believed America needed to be saved from itself, Webb said quietly. I thought we were preventing a war by allowing controlled influence instead of violent conquest. I was wrong about everything. By dawn, we had enough evidence to destroy the conspiracy that had killed my father and shaped my entire life. Webb's testimony, combined with the documentation my parents had gathered over 3 decades, painted a complete picture of the most successful intelligence operation in modern history. 6 months later, I stood in the same cemetery where we'd buried Uncle Robert, watching as the honor guard folded the American flag that had covered his casket during the reburial ceremony. This time, the flag would be presented to Aunt Margaret as the widow of Colonel Robert Harrison, United States Army, whose 30 years of undercover service had saved his country from enemies operating within its own borders. The trials had made international headlines. 7 council members, 43 foreign operatives, and over 200 compromised American officials faced charges ranging from treason to espionage. General Webb's cooperation had earned him a reduced sentence, but he would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. My mother stood beside me, no longer hiding behind the identity of Linda Mitchell. Major Linda Harrison had been officially reinstated to active duty long enough to receive the commendations she'd earned during Project Nightfall, then retired with full honors. As the honor guard completed the flag ceremony, the sergeant approached me and saluted. "Brigadier General Harrison," he said formally. "On behalf of a grateful nation." I returned the salute, still adjusting to the rank I'd been awarded for my role in exposing the conspiracy. The promotion had been partly ceremonial, recognition of my father's service and my own contribution to national security. But it also represented something more important: the completion of a mission that had consumed my family for 3 generations. Uncle Robert's headstone bore his real name now, along with the dates of his military service and a simple inscription: "He kept the faith." As we walked away from the cemetery, I realized that my quiet visit to Hartwell had accomplished something I'd never expected. I'd found my family, not just my mother, but my connection to something larger than myself. I discovered that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names never appear in history books, whose sacrifices are known only to those who understand the price of freedom. The funeral director who'd forgotten my name would probably never realize that the nephew he'd dismissed had helped save his country from enemies he'd never even known existed. But that was fine with me. Some victories are meant to remain secret. Some stories are told only in the silence between the flag folds and the echo of a final salute. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.